Hello and welcome to our Hats Off series podcast. This is a podcast where we interview educators, leaders, and individuals so that we can share inspiring conversations as well as thoughtful conversations. Today on our podcast, we have Miss Preeti Vikram with us. And Preeti Vikram is the founder of Tapas Education. She is a passionate educationist and parenting coach. She has authored and presented papers on education and parenting globally. She is an experienced professional who has trained teachers, coached parents, and worked with government bodies in shaping policies. She's also a serial entrepreneur, having built three successful businesses in education, leadership, mentoring, education, leadership, mentoring, and training over the last 2 decades. Ms. Preeti Vikram is an IIMB alumna, currently pursuing her PhD in school leadership. Welcome, Ms. Preeti. And I would request you to set the context for our audience, having introduced you, and now that our audience is aware of who you are. So I would request you to set the context.
Thank you so much for having me over, Raki,
Our
and a
pleasure.
wonderful initiative. Hats off series sounds interesting. So I'm definitely a viewer. I'm going to be watching everyone else that you're going to interview. I think education feels like it's in my blood. It feels like something I'm extremely driven by, and I look forward to learning and continuing to change the way we perceive education today towards what it's supposed to be. So that's the context in which I'm here, hoping to get my voice out there.
Great. So, as I have already introduced you, your professional journey, when I was reading your LinkedIn profile, it says your professional journey is defined by inspire, nurture, transform. These three words are boldly mentioned on your profile. So, can you share why you chose these three words to define your professional journey?
Um, Thankfully, I've always had the opportunity of working with people and getting them to look at education in a different way over the last 22 years that I've been in education. And my learning has been that people need to be motivated from within to make that change. And I think, especially more so in the field of education, that motivation doesn't happen unless you're inspired. So I am constantly trying to find ways in which we can bring inspiration to different people. It could be through podcasts like yours, books, anything that's possible. So, and just being able to walk the talk, and that's the inspire part of it. Now once a person is motivated enough, they need the resources to make that change, to be able to traverse that large chasm that's there. And hence nurture, you need to have the right people mentoring you, coaching you. And I believe there's enough possibilities for me to nurture people. And transform, while you've been motivated, you're inspired, then you've got the nurturing, and then you obviously transform, and then you pay it forward. So every person whose life I've touched is able to go ahead and transform other people's lives as well. So I think those three words kind of sum up how I look at my journey.
Wow, lovely. So, when you said that you get inspired, and then of course at the end there's transformation that happens. Can you share an instance where you actually experienced this? Can you share about your mentors who motivated you, and
Absolutely.
because of which, of course, you transformed?
Countless mentors. Very early on in my experience of in the field of education, Dr. Swati Popat Vats was one of my first few mentors. And I remember one of the times she had asked me about something, and I said, I don't have an opinion about it. I'm okay. Either ways is okay. And she said, no, Preeti, that's not the way. You need to have an opinion. You need to be mindful about exactly what you want, because unless you want something strongly, you're not going to fight for it. And I found that such an inspiring advice, because that has really guided my way forward. Mm, Another person I would say is Professor Sunil Handa from Eklavya School, Ahmedabad. He's also an IIM Ahmedabad professor. He was my mentor when I was in IMB. His work is amazing, and he is such an inspiring entrepreneur. But the most distinguishing factor about him is his generosity. He is constantly looking to share his knowledge, he's constantly looking to impact others. And he doesn't give you gyan, he lives by example. And I think his journey is pretty inspiring for me. So he is another person that I would like to mention. I could go on for hours. This whole podcast can be about my mentors, but these two
Yeah.
people really stand out as my mentors.
Wow, that's really awesome because the idea of mentorship, especially in education, is something which is undermined. Where I think most of the times teachers don't know whom to look up to, or whom to trust, or whom to confide in,
True.
because of which they struggle, of course. And I had a similar journey where, when I entered the classroom for the first time, I was clueless how I'm going to teach 40 students. What is it going to be like? Unless of course I discovered the people who can actually help me out, and then there's a certain amount of trust that builds over a period of time. But yes, mentorship is something I feel that in the Indian context, it's something which is undermined. So,
Yes.
why do you think that this idea of mentorship is not that? I mean, it could be my opinion. I don't know. You could correct if I'm wrong. Why do you think this idea of mentorship is something which has not been looked upon by our educators?
First of all, I think as Indians, given the size of our population, competition is something that's part of our DNA. Like we have to compete for every last resource, And so when there is so much competition, seeking out mentorship might not be easy because you perceive everybody as possible competition. And so I don't think it comes very easily, and it has to be a very intentional approach to learning and growing. Secondly, I think the teaching profession hasn't undergone too much transformation. As a profession, the B.Ed still looks the same. In the last 50 years, the B.Ed program hasn't undergone any change. Um, so when the teaching profession itself has not asked or challenged teachers to grow, where is the need for mentorship? I'm happy just looking at the textbook and planning my lessons. I don't need that. There are very few who are aware that they need mentorship. So maybe these two reasons, I think. But you're right, mentorship is the way that um, I think is the way for anybody to transform their own thoughts, and just be able to just bounce off
Lots of
ideas.
ideas. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's so true. What you said is right. That B.Ed remains the same, and that's where teachers don't feel challenged. And mentorship is something which needs you to go out there and ask for help, or for clarification, which again I think also requires courage, is what I feel.
Yes.
So, and that's something that we really need to push our educators for. So, coming back to your professional journey, you have been an advocate for play, and play is a central theme in your work. So, what was your first aha moment that made you realize its transformative power in learning?
So I looked at this question and I thought, was there an aha moment? Was there really something that I can bring up? And I don't think it was one moment. It's just an observation of how children are in the classroom, how you look at when you look at a classroom, you're able to understand that there's more learning happening when there is no direct teaching. The kind of instructional teaching is not going on. There is a lot more learning happening. So I think it was more intuitive, just observations and intuitions playing the part there. There wasn't one aha moment. But from my own experience as a student, I think I learned more outside of the classroom. I was a sports person growing up, and so I learned more outside of the classroom than inside of the classroom. So that coupled with this observation of how young children are learning, it just seemed to fit. Like play is the answer for whether it's mental health, social, emotional well-being, learning, anything you ask me, I would say play is your answer. Just go to play.
So, when you are advocating play in your teaching methodology, also, tell us how do you do that? Because when uh, when we talk about play, teachers often don't understand what exactly they're supposed to do. Are they just supposed to let children be? and play
Mm.
with things around them while we just watch them, or are we supposed to even direct the play activities so that we achieve the goals that we have set for in the curriculum? So what is the kind of play that should actually happen, especially in the early years?
I think there are a lot of types of play, and I don't want to go into a Gyan session. But suffice to know that play can be guided, so the teacher can set up provocations. Say you are doing, you're exploring vegetables in your lesson planning. You will set up a table of vegetables and some maybe cutting implements. You've just set it up, but children will naturally pick it up and play with it because they've observed this somewhere else, so they are naturally going to start playing with it. So guided play is possible. Teacher sets up these provocations, and it could be equipment that she's setting up, it could be ideas that she's giving. So that could be guided by the teacher. But there is also the unguided play, which is child led, that is more critical for teachers to observe. So I advocate that every school should have some part of the day which is not guided and which is completely child led. Allow the children to explore by themselves. Just observe, just make sure that they're safe in what they're playing, and they will reveal how they think through the way they play. So I think there should be a balance between the two. And when you take that to the higher grades, what play looks like is allowing children to be curious, allowing them to wonder, allowing them to experiment, and enjoy themselves without us having to intervene in the process of learning.
Okay, so according to you, even play can even happen in the higher grades.
100%. Even as adults, we should be playing.
And how is that possible, if you could just let us know, because as adults we rarely indulge in any kind of experience when it comes to play, until and unless of course there's something which is being organized. Yeah,
I don't mean the Candy Crush kind of
I
play
know. Yeah,
as adults.
right.
Um, I think even things like picking up a crossword and being able to solve it, being able to play a tic tac toe once in a while, a hangman, anything that gives you while you're sitting down waiting for something, go at a dinner table, play with words is something that I encourage.
Wordle.
Yeah, wordle by yourself or play with words, have humor in your life with your partners. Why not? So I think it's just a mindset of playfulness that adults need to develop. And a lot of adults think playing is playing a sport,
Hmm.
but that is a distinction we need to make. Playing
Wow.
is not necessarily a sport.
Playing sport.
Playing is being playful, finding fun in whatever you're doing, and that I think is critical.
Wow, I loved that. Play is being playful and finding fun in what you're doing, which is so important and which actually conveys the mindfulness and the thoughtfulness of the adult. But yes, this is something that we as adults rarely get into, playful experiences, because I believe that with the kind of race that we are into, and the kind of responsibilities that one has, that these experiences often take a backseat. So
Absolutely.
until and unless, of course, as I said, that they are planned and they are mindfully incorporated into our daily routines, so that we start enjoying these experiences, and at the same time we bring it at the forefront for our kids as well.
I'll
So
give you an example
yeah.
at tapas. Um, so when we are passing each other in the corridor as adults,
Hmm.
we have to find different ways of being playful with one another. Whether it's a high-fi, low-fi, you're constantly guessing how we are going to pass each other, and so it's
Wow.
just one thing that we do to stay playful, to stay completely. It's fun. It's a great place to work. So you feel great when you're playful, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's the nature of play.
keeps your energy high.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's great. That's a great idea. That when you're passing each other, that's something that you give a high five, and you keep your energy levels high, and it's playful and it's fun at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So that's a great example, and thank you for sharing that. So from coming back to the experiences that you've had in your journey, you also are into blogging, and your blog Growing Up with Yash beautifully captures your parenting journey as a coach. So if you had to distill your experience into three golden parenting rules, what would they be?
So I am not a blogger. I started this as a means of if my son were ever to need a pick me up, he just needs to open this blog up
Wow.
and read about himself that has captured his childhood. And I'm sure he'll feel better after reading it. And so that was the purpose of recording it at different
Okay.
points of life and showcasing it in a manner that it's helpful for anybody who's reading it also. Um, what started off as that, I think, kind of helped me understand myself better as a parent. And again, after seeing this question, the person that I asked about what do you think I should answer this was my son. I said, Sonny, uh, what are the things that I've done with you? I hope I haven't messed you up. What has gone well in this journey?
No, I'm sure
Um,
you haven't.
Time will tell. So far, so good. But yeah, I constantly say that he's the guinea pig of everything I've learned as an educator. I'm experimenting constantly. Having said that, I think a couple of things that I think have worked in our favor as a family. Mm, we look at parenting as a partnership. And when I say this is co parenting, not just me and my husband, I think we have uh, our son is also part of this co-parenting right from the first year. Like, I don't remember ever having treated him as a child. Both me and my husband have always thought that he's he's somebody today. He's in our hands, but he has a personality, he has desires, has wants, he has thoughts. So right from when he was young, we've been in the habit of talking to him what works, what doesn't work. This has been my day. So we've co parented together and always sought his opinions as well. So even as a 2 year old, his catchphrase would be, I have an idea, So he is constantly going like this. So um, just allowing him to feel like he belonged to this family was something that I feel went well for us. That partnership and knowing that it's a relationship, like how in a marriage you have to work towards making that marriage work, right? It's a lot of, I'm saying the you word work so many times, but it is work. You have to make sure that you are respectful of your partner. Same way, I think you have to be respectful of your child. That child should feel that they have a space and they're not just somebody to be ordered around at home or somebody who's a placeholder for an adult when they grow up. So I think this togetherness that we have found in co-parenting has worked really well for us. Um, Second thing, I think what we have done that, and I think that has made Yash into a mature young adult. He's 16 years old now. Um, is we've constantly told him he's responsible for his future. So anytime he comes for advice, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I take up arts? Should I take up science? What should I do? Should I drop maths? Should I continue with maths? So these are when he is having these big questions. We've said follow your heart, but know that the consequence belongs to you. Whatever you choose to do, finally you have to take responsibility for it. And so making him aware of that right from the beginning, I think, has made him um, learn to think about how he thinks. So the metacognition has happened and has made him a more mature adult. I see him using this metacognition even when he is having relationships, heartbreaks, navigating the teenage stuff, all this. So just ensuring that he is accepting of his failures, modeling of accepting failures ourselves, and making him aware of his thinking. I think that has been something that we has worked really well for us. And finally, the two H's that are cornerstones in my household. One H stands for humor. We laugh a lot together. We are a riot when we are together, especially my husband and son when they get together. Oh my God, they bring the house down. So we laugh a lot together. The second H is honesty. I can very proudly say till date I've never lied to my son. Never lied to my son. And I'm going out for a movie. I tell him I'm going out for a movie. Even when as a 3 year old he would understand that okay, she will come back. There's no problem. Um, I've maybe had some white lies where I haven't told the whole truth. But apart from that, honesty is a very big part of it. And so if somebody comes and tells me today, this is what Yash did, I can confidently say if he's done it, he will tell me because he's honest with me. So I believe that honesty has been a cornerstone. It's reciprocal. We show it and he shows us. Yeah, these three things. I don't know if there were more than three, but I tried to keep it to three.
Wow, that's really amazing to know. I loved your pointers in terms of co-parenting and metacognition. Helping him to think how
Yeah.
how he functions, how he thinks. I think these are stepping stones, and in today's day and age, especially in the digital age,
Mm-hmm.
uh, parenting is becoming difficult day by day. I have two kids, two boys. One is 10, one is 15, and with the teenage and the exposure to social media, peer pressure, I mean, there's so much that goes on, that being an educator and knowing exactly what needs to be done, at times you're not able to actually implement it. You're
Hmm.
not able
Hmm.
to help them understand. You're not able to help them zoom out,
Yeah.
and at times you also give in to things which you don't want to give
Of
it to.
course.
So, according to you, I mean, hats off to you for bringing Yash in this manner, because I believe that parenting is a trial and error process for every individual, and there is
Hmm.
no right and wrong. I mean, there's no licensing that's given to a parent, right? We don't have across the globe. There's no licensing that okay, now you have a license, you can produce a baby, but and nor are we working towards it.
Absolutely.
Very few people who are mindful, who are thoughtful, are working towards, preparing themselves first before becoming parents. So, in this day and age, as I was coming back to in this digital age, what is a major misconception about parenting that needs to be debunked? Because you also do a lot of parenting workshops as a parenting coach. So, what is a major misconception that parents have?
Um, I'm going to answer that first without the attaching the digital world part of it, the social media part of it. Just major myths that parents need to debunk. Um, First, I have observed that parents misunderstand the word. Um, Let me rephrase that. I think parents think of obedience as good behavior. And that's very wrong because they believe that as soon as they say something, the child has to get it done. So that misunderstanding that obedience is what is good behavior leads to a lot of conflict at home. The mental health of the child doesn't get developed because the child thinks that I can't cry because that will be construed as bad behavior, and so when they can't cry, they are suppressing their emotions. So I think there is a need for us to differentiate between what is good behavior, because good behavior comes from self regulation. A child should be able to look at how they're feeling. If I'm feeling upset, how can I bring myself to feel better? Because if that skill is lost when they, or not developed when they're children, they grow up to be teenagers who can't navigate the world of hormones, and grow up to being adults who probably get into substance abuse or some kind of mental illness because of not being able to do have self regulation. So I think as children, allowing for emotions to be present and dealing with those emotions in the right way, and not expecting obedience in place of that, like you've fallen down but it's okay, just brush it off and sit up. That's not what is expected of parents. So I think parents need to know what's the difference between good behavior and obedience. That's one of the things that I like to say. um, the second thing I definitely want to bring up is parenting is parents often believe that they have to be their children's friends. Our our older generation, our own parents were pretty much authoritarian, right? I mean, many of our parents were authoritarian. They had strict standards and we had to follow them. So, as a generation, I feel we are overcompensating and saying we have to be friends with our children. And I think there is a little bit of a problem here because I believe that all children will have a lot of friends, but they'll have only one set of parents. So, you've got to be parent. Be a friendly parent. So how does that differ? Like a friend will um, be your partner in crime and do everything, but a friendly parent will give you advice and say, these are the perils of the route that you're taking, watch out, but be okay with you trying and experimenting in a safe zone. So I think that distinction between being friends and being a friendly parent is what we need to figure out, because today's parent is losing the track when it comes to how to parent. They're either too authoritative or too
To
accommodating.
some
Balance, I think this is the key. When I attach the digital world and the social media part of it, there is no way we can protect our children from it. Let's be very, very clear. There is no way that we can keep them bubble wrapped from social media. But I think if they are confident, if they are secure in their own self, and that means that social media will have lesser and lesser impact. So I would say that early years is the time that you're going to build your child's confidence up, and from then you make sure that their confidence levels are so good, and their belief in themselves is so strong, and they know exactly how they think and what they think. The effects of social media might be mitigated through that. There is only one way to fight that, that is by building a stronger child, not a weaker social media. That's not possible.
Yeah, yeah, so true. Bringing up a strong child who's allowed to express their thoughts and who's made to feel like an adult rather than someone who can be ordered around. So, Preeti, tell me, how can one become a better parent?
I don't know. I'm figuring it out. I don't know if I'm the right
having
person to
been through, having
ask.
been through, how can one become a better parent? What is it that the parent needs to do, which probably many of them are not doing, or maybe they are doing, but they are still not there.
I think just follow your child. That's the best advice I can give. Follow your child. They will show you how to be a better parent. They will tell you what they need. Just allow them, like I said, be respectful of your child, and they follow them. They will show you how to be a better parent. That's the only way, right? I mean, there is, like you said, there is no licensing. There are no books to tell you exactly what will work for you as a parent. So we're, like you said, it's all trial and error. We're just navigating this world and hope that the damage that we are causing is a little as less as possible on our children.
To work on ourselves first, then work on the kids.
Absolutely.
Great. Yes, absolutely. It is confusing. How do you become a better parent, or what is the right kind of parenting? As rightly said, no right, wrong, no licensing, but beautifully said that follow the child's cue, and the child will let you know what is the kind of parenting he or she seeks. So that's wonderful. That's a message for me as well. I'll make a note of it. And many a times I find myself doing that. I actually go up to my son and I ask him, okay, tell me, how do you want me to handle this? If you were in my place, what would you do? And
Yeah.
there are times when he tells me that I would just want you to do this. If it's something which I feel, yeah, it's doable. I think
Yeah.
what he's saying makes sense. We go ahead and we're like, okay, done. Let's go ahead. So yeah, having conversations, having deep conversations, I believe, which is also missing owing to the hectic schedules and the running around. So having conversations and deep conversations about day-to-day activities that we get involved in, and as you were sharing that you would share with your child about your day, about the problems you're facing, and then he would go about saying, I have an idea. So
Mm.
giving them the space to contribute and feel belonged is also something that we as parents need to mindfully be doing, which again seems to be a task for many of us.
Absolutely. And I think parents find it difficult to find topics to talk to their children. So
Hmm.
it invariably comes back to how your education is going. How are you studying? What are the, tell me how your school is. Or so for the child, it's boring. Like, why do they've spent 8 hours in school. Why do they have to come back home and talk about the same thing? So also, what's critical is that today's day and age, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of fake news that goes on. You have your WhatsApp universities. There's fake videos, deep fake videos that's coming up. So where does the child get the sense of what is right? Where does the child get a sense of how do I discern whether this is right or wrong, real or fake, etc.? It's these conversations that you have. So it's very critical to, like I said, my mentor told me that you need to have opinions.
Hmm.
So have those opinions and discuss those opinions at home. You might differ, right? Like me and my husband might not have the same opinions about everything, but we debate and we show that healthy debate is possible. And those are the skills that my son is picking up. And that's exactly what we do at Tapas also, because we encourage that a debate is great. Let's debate, let's talk, let's find out why you and I are different, why we think differently. And so when we do that, they are able to acquire the skill of understanding right and wrong, and where do I stand when it comes to this spectrum of right to wrong. So my own opinions, my own thoughts, and so it helps build that character throughout the time. So it's okay, pick up the newspaper. If there is no newspaper at home today, people are looking at in shorts and other apps where they're getting their news from.
Yes, yes.
But pick up things that you will talk about from
Mm,
there.
mm,
um, and especially your dinner tables
mm.
should be gadget free. This is the time to have a good robust conversation with the child. So I think, yeah, sorry, I digressed. I went
No,
from one place to another, but
no,
I,
I think this is needed. Deep conversations are needed. At times when I don't get my son's attention, I just take him for an ice cream. And then purposely I get him into the car and then I take him for a drive. So I know that he's not going to get away from the car. So that's another way of
yeah,
absolutely cooping him up inside. So that
yeah,
at least we have a conversation and we are away from our gadgets. So that's another way of hijacking them if they are,
yeah.
completely busy and taken over by the social media world. But yes, I think beautiful nuggets shared on parenting, and parenting is a journey. You spoke about tapas. That is what we do
Yes.
at tapas. So tell us more about tapas. How did tapas happen, and why the word tapas?
Oh, how much time do you have, Raki? This is a conversation that I love having, and this is so much to tell, right? Um, Tapas is a space that after when you read my bio, you saw that I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've done things in different industries, but all similar, related to education in one way or another. The frustration has been through that journey. Whatever I do, and this is probably something you have also felt in, and before the podcast started, we were discussing your journey as well, where you see that once you have completed training or you've done some workshops for these teachers, they have very little chance of implementing what they've learned because they're going back to the same system. So there's a lot of frustration about how education should be. I know it should be that way, but I'm not able to make that change.
Mm,
So we set up tapas as a way of walking the talk, as a way of creating a space which could be a model for anybody who wants to take the leap, who has the courage to make that change. We say that, look, this is working. So it's possible, you can do this. So just to be able to walk the talk, like I said, is why tapas came into being. And I think our own personal journeys, frustrated parents who couldn't find the right school for our children. So, that frustration also brought us till here. It's been 8 years in the making, 8 years of research, what we should include, what we shouldn't do, all of that. Finally, pandemic, we said, let's take the leap. Two things happened during the pandemic. One was the NEP came out
yes,
2020, and which was like, wow, finally the word play exists in a national policy document. So I'm
absolutely.
so excited.
In the early years, yeah.
Yeah, in the early years. And then also that parents suddenly realized what their child is learning, exactly what they had learned, and maybe their parents had learned. So the content hadn't changed. So we felt that the time was right for us to take the leap and start something which would be acceptable to parents who are seeking something different, and at the same time the policy is showing that there is transdisciplinary approach that's possible, etc. So we took the leap, and that's how tapas came into being. The word tapas, we definitely wanted something Indic sounding, because we believe that we are a global school, global plus local. We are looking at how can every student who walks out of tapas have a sense of who they are. Their identity is strong as an Indian, as somebody who belongs to this part of the world, and transact internationally with that confidence. Because unless I know who I am, I cannot confidently work with the rest of the world. And so, having a little bit of an Indic nature, even in the other things that we are doing, we consciously adopted that. So when we were looking for a name, we were sure that it had to be a Sanskrit name, but something that also rolled off the tongue a little bit easily. It couldn't be something difficult.
Too long,
Um,
yes.
Plus, it had to also
Convey
signify,
the
yeah,
ethos.
yeah, of the school. So tapas literally stands for the onus of learning is on the learner, is on the
Wow.
student. So tapas is my own tapas of learning is what gives me the final fruits. So
Fruits.
that's what finally we settled on tapas. And interestingly, we had three names which we had a survey. We sent it out to parents and we said across the parenting community, and we said, please choose which one do you think best signifies, best embodies what we believe in. And tapas was the winner.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a lovely way of sending it off to the community and letting the community choose. And you said that we do things differently. So what are those things that you'll do differently at Tapas?
First
I'm
of
just
all, I
catching your
think,
words, so yeah.
sure. So at tapas, the most critical thing that, and yesterday evening we had a reflection, end of the year reflection, the whole team sat together, and the one thing that everybody unanimously spoke about, that tapas, what tapas stands for, is that we believe that the child is somebody when they are with us. So like how my parenting journey has been, I think I extrapolated that into my school journey as well. We call that the astitva, one of the panchadhatus at tapas. Astitva means that we acknowledge that the child has a personality, has thoughts, has ideas, etc. When they are with us, they don't. So the misconception that they are clay and we are molding them into something, or they are white paper on which we are writing, so that's not true. They are already having millions of thoughts, millions of ideas, millions of neuro pathways that have developed. So you can't treat them as there's nothing happening. So um, the fact that we are cognizant of the child being somebody when they are with us and respecting that is the cornerstone of tapas. So everything else gets built around that. So when you look at it from the child's point of view, how can learning become more meaningful? How can I learn and apply my knowledge, etc.? So everything is from the point of view of the child, and the child is at the center of everything we do, and we've built circles around that. And that is the philosophy. And how that translates into pedagogy is we follow project based learning, which has allowed us to take this child centric learning in a very meaningful contextual manner, at the same time meeting the curricular goals as set by the boards. So we are able to balance that out through project based learning.
Right. So basically, Tapas is focusing on the holistic growth of the child.
Absolutely.
And so, of lately, where recently there was an article in Mint I was reading about the sudden rise of micro schools,
Mm.
and why is it that alternate schools, micro schools, are actually flourishing?
Hmm.
So, just out of curiosity, I'm asking you this question. Since we are talking about tapas and tapas being catering to the holistic development of the child, following PBL approach, doing things differently, uh, according to you, why do you think there's a sudden rise in the growth of these micro schools or alternate schools, alternate spaces where the child is at the center? Because I don't know, somewhere I feel that as parents we are losing faith in the conventional system because child is no longer at the center.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm just voicing it out. Is that the reason why we are having a sudden
Yeah, I
rise?
think you kind of answered your own question there.
Okay.
That's possibly one of the reason, and I think there has been a set of parents who have always been disgruntled with the conventional education, which is why there have been like the KFI Foundation, the J. Krishnamurti schools that have flourished for the last 30, 40 years in
Yeah.
India. So that
Yeah.
shows that there were already parents who were thinking about education in a different way, educators thinking about how education should be in a different way. But I believe that we have reached a tipping point in our society. I think we are in the fourth revolution now. The After the industrial revolution, now the information revolution happened, and now we are in the fourth revolution where we just need to change the way we are learning if we want to catch up to what the future holds for us. So I think everybody is now recognizing that need, that the education system is no longer preparing us for a future which is so unknown. Uh,
Mhm.
because of that, I think there is a lot more interest in exploring alternatives. And unfortunately, we are still called the alternative approach. The education is supposed to be this way. I do hate the word alternative. I think
Alternative, yes.
maybe progressive is a better word. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I think that might be one of the reasons that now there is a lot more awareness
Mhm.
and openness to experiment. It's still a long way to go. And fortunately for us, Bangalore is a hub for this culture, this culture of progressive school. So we are in
Oh,
a very sweet spot.
got it, got it. Yes, absolutely. Especially metro cities, we are seeing that shift where parents are becoming more and more aware, and they are okay to experiment, try out something new. Where they somewhere they are also coming to the terms that that we need to slow down. You know, kids are going way too fast. There needs to be a structure which slows them down, and at the same time, parents also need to slow down with their own kids. So somewhere that awareness has set in, which is I think a good trend, because the impact will be more, and from the VUCA world, as we call it, we don't know what are we preparing our children for, so we are also
Absolutely.
not aware. But if at all we are aware that okay, there is a school which is holistically driven and which is catering to uh, the holistic development of my child, and my child is at the center, then definitely that's a safer take than a conventional school where there are 50 kids in one classroom cooped up, and you know journey continues less at the better.
I think
So
if we are able to teach children how to learn versus what to learn,
what to
we
learn,
yeah, I think the how to
how,
learn is
how
important.
to learn
And
is important.
it's like that saying, right? The adage that teach a man how to fish and he's able to feed himself for his whole life versus feeding him a fish for a day. That's exactly what we need to do with our learners, that teach them how to learn so they are set for life. Giving them the
True.
right skills, how to do research, how to take feedback, how to be able to work in a team. These are more critical than content today. The content is going to come, I mean, I can
From
just say
anywhere.
Google or hey Alexa, or
Yeah.
anyway, it's so easy to get content. So I think the attitudes, the skills, the competencies have to be developed versus the content knowledge.
Content. Yes. So teaching is all about actually setting the context and the experiences, so that things fall into place. And I would, as you said, yeah, not alternative spaces in progressive schools. This is something which happens very beautifully, probably because of the child teacher to child ratio, and also because the curriculum is well thought of,
Yeah.
and it's very mindful. Teachers are also mindful about creating those right kind of experiences, whether it's project based learning pedagogy or it's any other pedagogy. It's very well thought of and very well curated. So maybe that's the stark difference that we see in a conventional school versus progressive schools.
Another
uh,
difference I'd like to
yeah.
point out, which not too many people talk about, is that the micro schools, progressive schools, anything else that you call the schools which are on
Yeah.
the periphery, they empower their teachers.
Mm.
And I think the teachers here feel a sense of I can do this, like
Independence,
I got
yes.
this,
Yes.
and I am the subject matter expert going into the classroom. I'm preparing my lessons, which is the opposite of a conventional school where
So true.
their entire capabilities are to follow a curriculum, to follow a
Very
lesson
robotic.
plan made by somebody else. So that is their skill set. So
Mm.
when you empower teachers is when you see transformation. I think that is very critical for education. If we need to move anything forward, it cannot be a top down approach that a principal decides and then a coordinator and a headmistress and then finally the teacher is told what the decision is, versus a teacher decides and then the principal makes it possible, like okay, I'm going to support you to get this done. So when we change the way we perceive the hierarchy in a school is when actual transformation happens.
Wow. I think that is so poignant, because when teachers are given the freedom and the independence as subject matter experts, we definitely see changes in the classroom. And we also see that sense of belongingness, that yes,
Yeah.
this is my classroom. I'm responsible for their growth. So let me, walk that extra mile for them. it comes naturally. So yeah, very well said that in these schools, teachers are empowered. They are given the space to express their opinions, to actually experiment for that matter as well. And that's where the change happens. Beautifully said. So coming to our last question for the podcast, if there is one change in education which you would like to bring about, or let's say you would like to see overnight in education, what would that be?
I thought about this a little long and hard because there's so many things I want to change.
Yes.
But I think
Maybe you
one,
can make it three instead of one.
and I'll stick to one in the interest of time. Um, the one thing I definitely think we should change is our assessments. And I know that this is a pet peeve for many, many educators. This is something that we are all so frustrated about, that assessments force us to do things in a certain way. Like, you know, so I think if it was an overnight change that had to happen, when it comes to assessments, I would say make it at entry level and not at exit. Because when you have assessments at entry, which means the child has come into fifth grade and the fifth grade teacher is assessing the child at entry, then it's informing her practice, her or his practice in the classroom. It means that I know this child is here and I need to do this in order to get the child to where they need to be. Whereas when you do it at exit, it's a report card which nobody is able to do anything about. Like, what are you want? What do you want to do with
It's a
that report?
statement given.
Yeah, it's just a statement, so there can be no action on that.
Mm.
Similarly, at a key stage of a board exam, if we know that universities have their own entrance exams, why is 12th board exam so important? Like, just do away with it. Universities will have at their entrance exams, and then it's at an entrance state versus the exit. So the pressure of a board exam, if it is removed, then you will see a transformation in education. Today we are educating in order to assess, but I say you should assess in order to educate. So, just flip it. And that would be the biggest change that I want to see in education.
That's actually deep. Do you all do that in your school? Entry assessments?
Yes, yes, we do
Wow,
beginning of year. We
lovely.
do beginning of year. We understand where the child is. We do middle of the year, and then
Assessment.
end of the year. So,
End of the year assessment.
and the whole nature of assessments is formative. It's something that kids enjoy.
Hmm.
You have kids clamoring to show their learning. We have children who want to take assessments and say, "I have learned this." So there is a joy of assessments that you will see at the bus. So I hope
Yes.
that for every child that's possible.
That's so beautiful. A child looking forward to assessment. I think that's the biggest change that we would like to see in education rather than being scared about assessment, especially the summative assessments. Formative assessments are, of course, fun,
Fun,
but
yeah.
yeah, summative assessments and the entry assessment, mid-level assessment, in order to keep a check of where the child is and what is the intervention that can be done, so that at the end of the year we meet up and we catch those goals that we have set for the child. So
Absolutely.
that's, I think, a beautiful. That's in fact a beautiful input from your end. Thank you for sharing that, because this is something I'm sure many schools would be doing it, many progressive schools would be doing it. But yes, I think this should be incorporated in the majority of the schools, entry level assessments, and then of course mid level, and then the year end assessments
And as a policy decision, if that is possible, I think
as
at that level is what I'm hoping for. Of
yeah.
course, like anything else with the education, assessments can be a whole hour by itself. That's that
Absolutely,
conversation.
that's a separate conversation, because
Yeah.
ultimately it boils down to marks. As parents, we are okay with the experimentation, and up till the child is in grade 6, 7, we are okay with it. But the moment the child steps into grade 8,
But
it's like, oh
what are
my
you doing
god,
for board exams, and how is my
exactly. What are
child
you
going to
doing?
prepare?
How is my child going to be prepared to face those examinations, and then
Yeah.
international examinations and university papers, and all sorts of questions come in, and that's where again the rewiring changes. And that's where the teachers also fall into that confusion that, okay, we were told to follow a pedagogy which is a creative and
Child-centric.
child centric and experiential, and now suddenly we need to shift to completely academic. So yeah, a lot of these confusions can be sorted if assessments are put into place, and assessments are more holistic.
We have found a way to bury the entire marks part of the assessments deep into our learning ledger. So when a child looks at their learning ledger, they are able to see all their strengths, and the marks, which are grades,
Mm.
are one part of it. So the 70-80% of that learning ledger that a child is preparing for themselves in a year is self assessment, peer assessment, and classroom anecdote observational assessments. But the benchmarking assessments are only 20% of that report. So by making the learning ledger as something which is so holistic, we are showing that we value everything else about the child than the marks. And
Right.
that sends a message to the child. And so, which is why the fear of assessments is not there, because I have a say in how I'm assessed, what I'm assessed about. Because we're project based learning, our learners choose which projects of theirs need to be assessed. So they have complete control of how they appear in their learning ledger. They do, like I said, they do self assessments, they do peer assessments, they're able to give and receive feedback. So when you do all of this with assessments, it's a joy, and it doesn't have to be a frightful situation at the end of the year. So this is what we have tried to achieve, but like I said, another conversation that.
Great. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, and I look forward to visiting Tapas very soon because there's a lot that can be learned and implemented in schools, as well as teachers who can visit Tapas. So I look forward to organizing maybe a cohort of educators who would be interested in visiting the school and learning, because I believe that as educators, learning continues. It's a journey. Parents, educators, for all of us, it's a journey, and we are all discovering, we are all experimenting, we're all trying to get there. And what better than to actually see it in action, because
Yes.
it's being done, it's tried and tested. So then what better than that? And I think with your inputs about parenting, about teaching, about empowering educators, about the fear of assessments, how you all are tackling that fear, and how you all are actually getting the marks, the importance of the marks sublimed into the assessment. I think these are all inputs which, for that matter, any school leader, any educator, if they are hearing, they will be able to implement. It's not something which is not doable. So I'm absolutely delighted to be having this conversation with you, and thank you so much for being able to devote time. I'm glad that this podcast is going to reach out to our community, the educators in our community, and even if a bit of it is put into use, then I think the purpose is achieved.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and giving a platform for talking about things that are dear to me. Like I said at the beginning, before we started recording, fabulous questions. I think you have a
Thank you.
great sense of how to get people to talk. So,
Trying
congratulations.
to do that. Yes.
Congratulations on that, and congratulations on the great platform that you've created. Teachers help teachers. I think this is a very, very valuable community that you're building.
Thank you.
Great work, and keep it up.
Thank you so much. And yes, I will keep coming back to you for mentoring because, as I said, that it's always great to learn from individuals who have tried and tested things. And your vision is something which really, really inspires me. So I look forward to your mentoring as well. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Jackie. Bye bye.